You know the story. In the beginning, there's nothing. From a cosmic egg emerged Arceus, the original one, the alpha Pokémon. It shaped the universe with its 1,000 arms. It created time, space, antimatter. It created emotion, willpower, knowledge. And then, it rested. That's the legend they tell you. That's what the ancient texts say. That's what every Pokédex entry, every myth, every shrine in Sinnoh whispers into existence. But here's what keeps me up at night, what should keep you watching for the next few hours. If Arceus truly is the omnipotent creator deity of the Pokémon universe, if it really does possess the power to shape reality itself, to birth dimensions from nothingness, to command the very fabric of existence, then why can a 10-year-old child with a Master Ball catch it? Why does it faint from a super effective attack? Why does it need to hold items to change its type? And perhaps most disturbingly, why does the Pokémon we encounter at the Hall of Origin feel less like meeting God and more like meeting a messenger? Tonight, we're diving into the deepest, most unsettling corners of Arceus lore. We're going to explore the theory that everything we know is a carefully constructed illusion. We're going to examine evidence that suggests the Arceus we see isn't even close to the real thing. And by the end of this journey, you might never look at the Pokémon universe the same way again. Before we descend into this rabbit hole, I want to hear from you. What's your take on Arceus? Do you think it's truly a god, or just an incredibly powerful Pokémon that ancient people misunderstood? Drop your theories in the comments, because some of the wildest ones might just have merit. And if you're enjoying this deep dive into Pokémon's darkest mysteries, show some love with a like. If this kind of content is your thing, consider subscribing, because we're just getting started with these lore explorations. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming. Now then, let's talk about what we think we know. The official story goes like this. Before the universe existed, there was only a churning turmoil of chaos. From this primordial void, an egg manifested. And from that egg, Arceus was born. It emerged into absolute nothingness and immediately set about the work of creation. With its 1,000 arms, it shaped the cosmos. It created two beings to govern the fundamental forces of existence. Dialga to control time, and Palkia to rule over space. Some texts mention a third being, Giratina, representing antimatter, though this knowledge was suppressed or forgotten for reasons we'll explore later. After establishing the framework of reality itself, Arceus created three more beings, Uxie, Mesprit, and Azelf. These late guardians represent knowledge, emotion, and willpower respectively, the three elements that would give birth to consciousness, with matter created by Dialga and Palkia, and spirit created by the late guardians. The universe as we know it could finally take form. Arceus then retreated, watching silently from its realm beyond time and space. That's the myth. That's the story carved into ancient stone, whispered in the halls of Celestic Town, studied by researchers like Cynthia. It's beautiful, it's comprehensive, it's neat. It's also full of holes so large you could fly Rayquaza through them. Let's start with the most obvious problem, the one that should immediately make anyone question this narrative. Arceus, supposedly the omnipotent creator of all reality, can be caught. Not just defeated, not just encountered, caught, placed in a Pokéball, stored in a PC box alongside your Beta-Uff and Wurmple. The being that shaped the universe with its 1,000 arms can be knocked out by a well-trained Garchomp. Does that make sense to you? 'Cause it shouldn't. Think about what we're being told here. This entity existed before existence itself. It created the concepts of time and space from nothing. It gave birth to dimensions and physical laws. It established the foundation for all consciousness. And yet, when you encounter it at the Hall of Origin, it is stats. It can be paralyzed. It can fall asleep. It takes damage from fighting type moves. It's bound by the same turn-based battle system as literally every other Pokémon. Now, before you rush to the comments to explain game mechanics versus lore, hear me out. Yes, obviously Game Freak needed to make Arceus catchable and battleable for gameplay purposes. That's not the point. The point is, what if the game mechanics are accidentally revealing a deeper truth? What if the reason Arceus can be caught, can be defeated, can be contained in a small sphere, is because the Arceus we're encountering isn't the real thing at all? This brings us to what I call the Avatar Theory. The Avatar Theory proposes something that fundamentally changes how we understand Arceus, and by extension, the entire Pokémon universe. It suggests that the Arceus we see, catch, and battle is not the true Arceus. It's not the original one. It's not the creator deity. Instead, it's an avatar, a fragment, a fingertip of something so vast, so beyond comprehension, that what we're interacting with is merely the smallest possible piece that could manifest in our dimension without tearing reality apart. Think of it this way. Imagine you're a two-dimensional being living on a flat piece of paper. You can only perceive length and width. Now imagine a three-dimensional hand reaching down through your paper world. What would you see? Not a hand. You'd see a cross-section. 5 circular shapes where the fingers intersect your plane of existence. To you, those 5 circles would be separate entities. You'd have no way of knowing they're all part of one unified hand, much less that the hand is attached to an arm, connected to a body, controlled by a mind infinitely more complex than anything in your two-dimensional experience. That's us looking at Arceus. We're the beings on the paper, and what we're seeing is just where something incomprehensibly larger chose to touch our reality. There's actually a surprising amount of evidence supporting this interpretation, if you know where to look. Let's start with something subtle that most players overlook. Arceus's various forms. Yes, when it holds different plates, its type changes. But in Pokémon Legends Arceus, there's a moment that's easy to miss. Before you battle Arceus in the Hall of Origin, there's a cutscene. And in that cutscene, Arceus appears as pure light. Not as the white equine form we're familiar with, pure golden light in the rough shape of Arceus. The game itself shows us that the physical form might just be a construct, something it assumes to interact with us rather than its true state of being. Then there's the lore around the Hall of Origin itself. This isn't some random location. It's described as a realm that exists outside normal space and time. When you play the Azure Flute at the Spear Pillar, you don't just walk somewhere. A staircase literally manifests from nothing, leading to a place that shouldn't exist by the normal rules of physics. The Hall of Origin exists in what might be called a pocket dimension, a bubble where our reality and something else can briefly overlap. It's a meeting point, a threshold, the only place where something like the true Arceus could safely interface with our world without consequences. And here's where it gets really interesting. The Sinjoh Ruins event from Pokemon Heart Gold and Soul Silver. We'll dive deep into this later, but here's the relevant part for now. When Arceus creates an egg containing Dialga, Palkia, or Giratina at the Sinjoh Ruins, it doesn't do it alone. It's surrounded by Unown, hundreds of them, swirling in a vortex around Arceus, as reality itself seems to rewrite. the Unown are absolutely critical to the creation process. Why would an omnipotent god need help creating anything? Unless the Arceus we see isn't operating at full power. Unless it needs the Unown to amplify or channel its abilities because it's only a fraction of the true entity. But perhaps the most compelling evidence comes from examining what Arceus actually is at a conceptual level. The Pokédex tells us Arceus shaped the universe with its 1,000 arms. Except Arceus doesn't have arms, it has 4 legs. So what are these 1,000 arms? For years this was dismissed as poetic language, metaphor, ancient peoples trying to describe the indescribable. But what if it's literal? What if the 1,000 arms are the actual extent of the true Arceus, and what we see is just one tiny fraction of that greater whole? Consider this. In many religious and mythological traditions, there are entities described as having countless arms or infinite forms. Avalokitesvara in Buddhism is sometimes depicted with 1,000 arms, each one representing a different aspect of compassion reaching into the world. What if Arceus operates on a similar principle? What if the true Arceus exists as something vast and formless, and those 1,000 arms are how it interacts with reality? Each arm reaching into our dimension, each one potentially appearing as what we think of as an Arceus. This would explain so much. It would explain why Arceus can be in multiple places at once in the lore, why different regions have different legends about it, why it can create eggs of the creation trio without those Pokémon ceasing to exist elsewhere. They're all different manifestations, different fingers of the same hand reaching down from a higher dimension we can't fully perceive. It would also explain the fundamental power discrepancy. The true Arceus, the original one that exists outside time and space, would be truly omnipotent, infinite, unchallengeable, but a fragment, an avatar, a single arm out of 1,000. That could have limits, that could be caught, that could have stats and be bound by battle mechanics. It's not that Arceus is weak, it's that we're only fighting the tiniest splinter of something unimaginably more powerful. Some of you might be thinking, this is all speculation, and you're right to be skeptical. But let's look at what we can observe. The Arceus at the Hall of Origin has a base stat total of 720. That's exceptional, yes. It's tied for the highest non-mega, non-primal stat total in the game. But it's not infinitely powerful, it's measurable, it has limits. Meanwhile, the lore describes Arceus as having created the concepts of time, space, and antimatter themselves. It describes it as having shaped reality from nothing. Those aren't the actions of something with quantifiable stats. Those are the actions of something beyond measurement. There's a dissonance here, and the avatar theory resolves it perfectly. What if the Arceus with 720 base stats is exactly what we should expect from a limited manifestation? Strong, yes. Incredibly so. But not infinitely powerful because it's not meant to be. It's meant to be just strong enough to test worthy individuals, to serve as an avatar for the true entity's will, but not so powerful that it destabilizes reality by existing. And here's something else to consider. In Pokémon Legends Arceus, the titular Pokémon tells you outright that it's sending a part of itself to join you. Arceus isn't a name it chose, it's a name humans gave to it. The actual entity, speaking through this avatar, refers to itself simply as the one who shaped all there is in this world. It makes a clear distinction between itself and its physical manifestation. It literally says it's giving you a fragment. The game is telling us, explicitly, that what we catch isn't the whole thing. But if the Arceus we see is just an avatar, just a fingertip of something larger, then what is the true form? What does the original one actually look like, if looks like even applies to something that exists beyond space and time? Honestly, we probably couldn't comprehend it. The true Arceus might not have a form at all in the way we understand it. It might exist as pure energy, pure information, pure existence. It might be the universe itself, the quantum foam underlying reality, the mathematical laws that govern causality. When ancient peoples tried to describe it, they latched onto the avatar because that was something they could see, something they could make sense of. The white quadruped with the golden ring became the icon, the representation, but it was never the actual truth. Think about it from Arceus's perspective, if it even has something we'd recognize as a perspective. It exists outside time, meaning it experiences all moments simultaneously. It created space, meaning it's not bound to any location. It shaped the universe with its 1,000 arms, meaning it's in constant contact with all of reality at once. How could something like that meaningfully interact with a single human child standing in a shrine in Sinjoh? It couldn't. Not directly. It'd be like trying to shake hands with an electron, or have a conversation with gravity. So it creates an avatar, something small enough, limited enough, comprehensible enough to serve as an interface. The avatar can battle. The avatar can be caught. The avatar can hold items and change types and do all the things that make it accessible within the Pokemon world's logic. And through that avatar, the true Arceus can observe, can test, can gift a portion of its power to those it deems worthy, all without having to fully manifest in a dimension that probably couldn't handle its presence. This recontextualizes every Arceus encounter in the franchise. When you meet it in Legends Arceus after catching every Pokemon, you're not being tested by an all-powerful god deciding if you're worthy. You're being observed by an incomprehensible entity that has sent a fragment of itself to evaluate you. When Team Galactic tries to use Dialga and Palkia to remake the world and Platinum and Giratina intervenes, Arceus isn't absent. It's watching through 1,000 eyes, through the very fabric of reality. But it only manifests an avatar when absolutely necessary, because doing so is, for lack of a better word, expensive in ways we can't understand. The avatar theory also explains one of the strangest aspects of Arceus lore, its relationship with the Unown. And that brings us perfectly into our next chapter, because if Arceus is truly this vast, multi-dimensional entity, then how does it act upon our world? How does it create? How does it shape reality when it can only manifest tiny fragments of itself? The answer, I believe, lies in understanding something that's been hiding in plain sight since Generation 2. The answer lies in understanding that Arceus might have 1,000 arms, but each of those arms is made of living letters, the unknown, strange, flat, alphabet-shaped Pokémon that seem weak and useless in battle. Most players encounter them as a curiosity, a gimmick, 28 different forms to collect and then forget about. They're relegated to obscurity, a weird footnote in the Pokédex. But what if that's the biggest misdirection in the entire Pokemon universe? What if the Unown are actually the most powerful Pokemon in existence? Because they are the arms of God? Let me take you to a place. The ruins of Alph in Johto. Ancient stone chambers covered in mysterious writing. 4 puzzle rooms, each one dedicated to a different depiction of Pokemon. Kabuto, Aerodactyl, Omanite, and Ho-Oh. Solve the sliding puzzles and the floor crumbles beneath you, dropping you into dark underground halls where the unknown wait. Most players remember this as a quirky side area, maybe a place to complete the Pokédex. But there's something else, something atmospheric that makes the ruins of Alph feel different from anywhere else in Pokemon. Something off. If you tune your Pokégear radio while inside the ruins, you can hear something on a mysterious wavelength. Channel 13.5, a frequency that shouldn't exist. And on that frequency, there's a transmission. Not music, not words. It sounds like static, yes, but not random static. There's a pattern to it, a rhythm. Some players have described it as unsettling, others as almost musical. It sounds like reality glitching, like the world's code being rewritten in real time. And if you listen to this mysterious transmission, you're more likely to encounter unknown forms you haven't seen yet. The signal calls to them, or perhaps they are the signal. The ruins of Alph have always felt sacred. The puzzles depict ancient Pokemon, yes, but the ruins themselves are far older than those Pokemon's existence would suggest. The architecture is pre-modern, possibly predating the earliest known civilization in Johto. And yet the Unown are there, seemingly guarding something, protecting some ancient knowledge or power. The researchers studying the ruins are stumped. They know the Unown are important. They know there's a connection to creation mythology. But they can't articulate what. What if the ruins of Alph are a temple, not to the Pokemon depicted in the puzzles, but to the power of creation itself? What if the Unown were drawn there, or placed there, as custodians of something fundamental about how the Pokemon universe operates? Let's talk about what we know about Unown from a purely mechanical standpoint. They have one move, Hidden Power. That's it, just Hidden Power. And Hidden Power is unique because its type varies. It can be any type depending on the individual Pokemon's stats. The Unown, these letter-shaped creatures that seem completely weak, have access to a move that can adapt to become any element, any type, any form of energy. That's suspiciously versatile for something supposedly so powerless. And there are 28 forms, 26 letters of the Latin alphabet, plus an exclamation point and a question mark. They are literally language given form. They are symbols, characters, the building blocks of written communication. And communication, when you think about it, is just another word for creation. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The Gospel of John knew what it was talking about, apparently, because in Pokemon, the Word might literally be the mechanism of divine creation. Now let's jump forward to Pokemon Heart Gold and Soul Silver and the event that should have broken the fandom's understanding of Arceus lore wide open, the Sinjoh Ruins. The Sinjoh Ruins are special. They're not in Johto, they're not in Sinnoh, they're not in Kanto. They exist somewhere else, in a pocket of space accessible only through the combined power of Arceus and the Unown. The name itself is significant. Sinjoh. Sin from Sinnoh, Jo from Johto. It's a place that exists between regions, a liminal space where two cultures' understanding of creation mythology blended together centuries ago. Here's how the event works. If you bring Arceus to the ruins of Alph in Heart Gold or Soul Silver, having it as your lead Pokemon, something incredible happens. As you approach the Ruins Research Center, an archaeologist comes running out, shocked to see you have Arceus. He asks you to enter the ruins with him to investigate a phenomenon, and then you're teleported, not by Arceus alone, The screen fills with unknown symbols, hundreds of them swirling in a vortex, and suddenly you're somewhere else. The Sinjoh Ruins, a frozen wasteland with architectural elements from both Sinnoh and Johto cultures. Cynthia, the Sinnoh champion, is there waiting for you. She's been researching these ruins, trying to understand their significance. She tells you she feels something's about to happen at the mystery stage, the centerpiece of the ruins, and she's right. When you take Arceus to the mystery stage, you're given a choice. 3 circles marked with symbols representing Dialga, Palkia, and Giratina. Choose one, and then witness something that should not be possible. Unown appear, dozens of them, then hundreds, swirling around Arceus in a tornado of living symbols. The mysterious transmission sound plays, that same unsettling frequency from the ruins of Alph, but louder, more insistent. The unknown voices overlap, creating a chorus that sounds like reality being written. And then, creation. The screen flashes white, images of space, of time, of the cosmos flickering in and out of existence. Real photographs of Earth, of stars, of nebulae briefly superimposed over the Pokémon world, suggesting that what you're witnessing transcends the game itself. And when the light fades, there's an egg. An egg containing a level 1 Dialga, Palkia, or Giratina, depending on which circle you chose. Arceus just created a god, from nothing, with the help of the unknown. Let that sink in. Arceus, supposedly the omnipotent creator, needed the unknown to perform an act of creation. It couldn't do it alone, or rather, the avatar of Arceus couldn't do it alone. But with the unknown channeling and amplifying its power, it could reach back to the true Arceus and pull enough creative energy through to manifest a new instance of one of the creation trio. The Unown aren't separate from Arceus. They're extensions of it. They're the 1,000 arms. Think about how it all fits together. Arceus, the true Arceus, exists beyond our dimension as something vast and incomprehensible. When it needs to exert its will on our reality, when it needs to create or shape or influence events, it uses the Unown. The Unown are the interface between the infinite and the finite. They're pieces of Arceus's consciousness, or perhaps Arceus's raw creative power given individual form. Each Unown is a letter, and when enough letters combine, they can spell out new reality. This is why the Unown are weak individually, but potentially all-powerful collectively. A single letter means nothing, but combine letters into words, words into sentences, sentences into paragraphs, and you can write anything. You can write worlds into existence. This is why the Unown gather at the ruins of Alph. They're drawn to places of power, places where the barrier between dimensions is thin, where the true Arceus can more easily reach through and manipulate reality. The ruins themselves might be a conduit, a focusing point. And the mysterious transmission on channel 13.5, that's not static. That's the sound of creation itself, the fundamental frequency at which the Unown operate, the carrier wave of divine will. In Pokémon the movie, Spell of the Unown, we see what happens when Unown act on human desires. Molly, a young girl who's lost her father, is surrounded by Unown who begin reshaping reality according to her wishes. They create an illusory Entei. They transform her mansion into a crystalline palace. They warp the world around her to make her dreams manifest. The movie portrays this as the Unown responding to intense emotion. But what if it's deeper than that? What if the Unown are always listening, always waiting to receive instructions, and Molly's desperate wishes were simply the most direct commands they'd received in centuries. The Unown might be constantly maintaining reality. Every moment, every physical law, every quantum interaction could be the Unown executing code written by the true Arceus. They're not Pokemon in the traditional sense. They're workers, drones, angels, if you want to get biblical about it. They're the mechanism through which an omnipotent, omnipresent consciousness acts upon a reality it created but cannot fully enter without destabilizing it. And this explains the mystery of the 1,000 arms. Arceus doesn't have 1,000 physical arms. It has thousands, maybe millions, maybe infinite Unown, each one a tiny fraction of its power, each one capable of reading and writing reality according to the grand design. The ancient peoples who carved the myths into stone tablets and plates saw Arceus surrounded by these strange symbols and interpreted them as arms, as extensions of the divine will. They weren't wrong. They just lacked the vocabulary to describe what they were actually witnessing. This interpretation also explains why the Unown are so mysterious. Why so little is known about them even by Pokemon researchers. How do you study something that's not really a separate species but rather fragments of a god? Every time you catch an Unown, you're essentially catching a tiny piece of Arceus's consciousness. No wonder they seem blank, emotionless, alien. They're not meant to be individuals. They're letters in an alphabet, pixels on a screen, cells in an infinite body. The connection between Arceus and the Unown runs deeper than most realize. In Pokemon Legends Arceus, there are old verses, scattered throughout Hisui, that provide glimpses into ancient understanding of Arceus. One of them specifically mentions the Sinjoh Ruins, drawing a parallel between that sacred place and the Hisui region itself. The implication is that Sinjoh wasn't unique. There have been other places, other times, where the Unown gathered in great numbers to channel Arceus's creative power. Hisui might have been one such place, which would explain why so many spatial and temporal anomalies plague the region, why Arceus takes such direct interest in events there. There's also the matter of the Hall of Origin's design. Look at it carefully when you access it in Legends Arceus, or through the Azure Flute in Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl. The floor is covered in a pattern, concentric circles with radial lines extending outward. That pattern shows up elsewhere, at the Sinjoh Ruins during the creation event. It's the same design, the same sacred geometry. It's a sigil, a magic circle, a programming language written in visual form. And what appears when this pattern activates? Unown. Always the Unown, swirling and spiraling, reading the instructions written in stone and space, translating divine will into physical manifestation. If the avatar theory is correct, if the true Arceus exists as something vast and formless beyond our dimension, and if the Unown are its 1,000 arms reaching into our world, then every act of creation, every legendary event, every cosmic level occurrence in the Pokemon universe is the result of reality being written by living letters, following a script penned by something we can barely conceptualize. The Unown are the writers, the plates are the language, and Arceus is the author. Which brings us to another mystery, another piece of forbidden lore that was literally kept from players for over a decade, the Azure Flute. You've heard of the Azure Flute, right? If you're deep enough into Pokemon lore to be watching this video, you probably know about it, but let me set the stage for those who don't. Because the story of the Azure Flute is one of the strangest cases of cut content in gaming history. It's also potentially evidence, of something that makes Arceus even more terrifying than we've discussed so far. In Pokemon Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum, there exists an item in the game's code called the Azure Flute. If you somehow obtain it and take it to the spear pillar at the summit of Mount Coronet after catching or defeating Dialga and Palkia, something remarkable happens. You can play the flute, and its melody, described as eerie and otherworldly, causes a staircase to manifest from thin air. A staircase that leads upward to the Hall of Origin, where a level 80 Arceus awaits. This was meant to be an event item. Nintendo was supposed to distribute it through Mystery Gift, making it possible for players to legitimately catch Arceus in the Generation 4 games. Except, they never did. The Azure Flute was never released. Not in Japan, not in North America, not in Europe, nowhere. For years, the only way to access it was through cheating devices or hacking your save file. In 2013, Junichi Masuda, one of Pokemon's directors, finally explained why in an interview. He said they decided not to release the Azure Flute because they felt it would be too confusing for players. The process of obtaining Arceus was apparently deemed too complex. Players would need to know to go to Mount Coronet, find their way to the spear pillar, and think to use the Azure Flute there without any direct in-game guidance. But here's where things get interesting. That explanation doesn't really hold water, does it? Pokemon has never been afraid of obscure event requirements. The Regis in Generation 3 required you to have a Relicanth and Wailord, navigate underwater currents, read Braille, and know to use specific moves in specific locations. Shaman required you to get Oak's letter and find your way through a flower-covered path to Flower Paradise. Darkrai required the member card to access the locked-in and Canal of City. These were all distributed, and they were arguably just as confusing as the Azure Flute would have been. So why was Arceus different? Why was this one item, this one event, deemed too complicated when others weren't? I want you to consider an alternative explanation. What if the Azure Flute was never released, not because it was confusing, but because someone at Game Freak realized they'd created something too significant? Something that implied too much about what Arceus really is? The Azure Flute isn't just a key, it's a summoning tool. The Japanese name translates to Heaven Flute, and when you play it, you're not simply opening a door. You're playing a melody that tears through the fabric of space-time itself. The flute's music is described in the game's text as creating a staircase from nothing, but watch what happens in the animation. Reality warps, the air shimmers, a pathway manifests that leads somewhere that shouldn't exist by any physical law. You're not walking to the Hall of Origin, you're being pulled up into another dimension, or that dimension is briefly overlapping with yours. The Azure Flute is a telephone to God, and when you dial that number, something answers. Think about the implications of that. Think about what it means that an instrument can be crafted, can exist in the physical world, that has the power to force a connection to Arceus. Who made the Azure Flute? The game never says, but the lore implies it's ancient, possibly created by the same civilizations that built the Spear Pillar and worshipped Arceus as the almighty Sinnoh. These people somehow figured out the exact frequency, the exact melody, the exact combination of sounds that could pierce the veil between dimensions and demand an audience with creation itself. That's not just impressive, that's terrifying. It suggests that Arceus's power, while vast, can be accessed, can be called upon, can be, in some sense, controlled, or at least communicated with through the right knowledge. The Azure Flute is proof that humanity once had a direct line to the divine, and chose to preserve it, to pass down the knowledge of how to play that haunting melody, even if they lost understanding of what they were doing. And here's the really wild part. The Azure Flute worked. It's in the game. People who hacked it in could use it. It functioned exactly as described. The Hall of Origin exists. Arceus appears there. Everything was programmed and ready to go. Game Freak created this entire system, and then specifically chose not to let players access it legitimately. Was it really about confusion, or was there a moment during development where someone realized, wait, we're letting children summon God with a musical instrument. Maybe that's a line we shouldn't cross. There's something profoundly unsettling about the Azure Flute that goes beyond game mechanics. It's the idea that something so powerful, so fundamentally reality-altering can be held in human hands. It's small, it's portable, and it works anywhere in the region once you have it, though it only manifests the staircase at the spear pillar because that's where the dimensional barrier is thinnest. The flute doesn't just alert Arceus to your presence, it forces Arceus to manifest. It compels the avatar to appear. Think about that power dynamic. Arceus is supposed to be the supreme being, the creator of all, the original one that shaped existence. And yet there's a musical instrument that can make it show up on command. That's not the relationship between a deity and worshippers. That's something else. That's a backdoor in the code. That's a summon spell that even God has to answer. Unless the Azure Flute was created by Arceus itself. Unless the true entity, knowing it couldn't manifest freely in our dimension, created a tool that would allow its avatar to be called when needed. A way for worthy individuals to reach out, to signal that they required a fragment of divine power to join them. In that interpretation, the flute isn't controlling Arceus, it's a gift. A phone number Arceus left behind saying, "If you prove yourself worthy, if you make it to the top of my sacred mountain, if you solve the puzzle of my existence, play this song and I will come." That's beautiful in a way, but it's also revealing. It suggests planning, intention. Arceus left the flute specifically because it knew it couldn't always intervene directly. The avatar system has limitations. There's a cost to manifesting in our reality, a strain on the fabric of existence. So Arceus created a workaround, a melody that would trigger the creation of a temporary bridge, allowing a fragment to cross over when called. The Azure Flute mystery extends to another quirk that players discovered, the sound itself. People who hacked the item and used it described the flute's melody as haunting, beautiful, and somehow wrong. It doesn't sound like any other music in Pokémon. It has an ethereal, otherworldly quality that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up. Some players reported feeling genuinely unsettled by it, like they were hearing something not meant for human ears. Music has power in Pokémon lore. The Poke Flute can wake sleeping Pokémon. Meloetta's song can change its form and, in the movies, influence legendary Pokémon. The Eon Flute can summon Latios or Latias, but the Azure Flute is different. Its melody doesn't just influence Pokémon or travel. It tears through dimensional barriers. It's a sonic key that unlocks reality itself. What if the reason the Azure Flute was never released wasn't about game design confusion at all? What if it was about the implications, about not wanting to explicitly acknowledge that there are tools, knowledge, potentially accessible to humans, that can command divine attention? The Azure Flute in the hands of the wrong person doesn't just let them catch Arceus. It lets them potentially threaten it, understand it, maybe even copy its power. And that brings us full circle to something we'll explore much later. Type, Null, because the Azure Flute represents ancient humanity's attempt to understand and access Arceus's power, while type, Null represents modern humanity's attempt to recreate it. One is mystical, the other scientific, but they're both reaching for the same forbidden knowledge. What if we didn't need to worship God? What if we could be God? But I'm getting ahead of myself. The point is, the Azure Flute is evidence that Arceus, despite its power, is not entirely unreachable. It can be called, it will answer. And that fact alone suggests limitations. True omnipotence doesn't need to provide a contact method. True omniscience already knows when it's needed. The existence of the Azure Flute implies that Arceus's manifestation in our world requires specific conditions, specific triggers. It's not watching everything all the time, or if it is, it can't intervene everywhere all the time. The avatar Arceus, the one we can catch, has boundaries, rules it operates within, and the Azure Flute is the key that unlocks one of those boundaries, allowing it to manifest at humanity's call, rather than only when it chooses. When Pokémon Legends Arceus finally gave players legitimate access to this cut content, it was both satisfying and revealing. After catching every single Pokémon in the Hisui Pokédex, proving your dedication and skill, you receive the Azure Flute. Not from a person, not from an event distribution. You receive it because it's time. Because you've proven yourself. The Celestica Flute you've been using to call rideable Pokémon throughout the game transforms, becomes the Azure Flute, as if it was always meant to become that tool once you were ready. And when you play it at the Temple of Sinnoh, the staircase appears. You climb to the Hall of Origin. And there, finally, after decades of waiting, players could legitimately battle and catch Arceus. The battle itself is mechanically simple, but thematically rich. Arceus appears as golden light before taking its physical form, reminding us again that what we're fighting is a manifestation. It uses Judgment, its signature move that changes type dynamically. And when you win, Arceus acknowledges you, explicitly states it's sending a part of itself with you, and joins your team. It's not pretending to be the full entity. The game tells you, plainly, this is a fragment, a piece of the whole, given to you as a reward and perhaps as a test. What will you do with a sliver of divine power? How will you use it? Will you prove worthy of carrying even this small fraction of creation's might? The Azure Flute finally being accessible brings closure to a mystery that haunted Pokémon for over a decade, but it also reinforces everything we've been discussing. Arceus operates through avatars, through fragments, through carefully managed manifestations that don't destabilize our reality. The Azure Flute is the tool that makes one specific manifestation possible, the Hall of Origin encounter, where the being that shaped all there is in this world condescends to test a single human. And that test, that encounter, leads us to perhaps the darkest aspect of Arceus lore. Because if Arceus truly created everything, if it shaped the universe with its 1,000 arms, if it established the fundamental forces and beings that govern reality, then it's also responsible for creating violence, creating imbalance, creating a being so destructive, so antithetical to the order it was trying to establish, that even God itself couldn't tolerate its presence. Let's talk about the original sin. Let's talk about the banishment, Let's talk about the third member of the creation trio, the one that was written out of history, hidden from mythology, condemned to an eternal prison dimension where its very existence can't threaten the world Arceus worked so hard to create. Let's talk about Giratina. End of part 1, approximately 10,500 words. The Arceus Enigma, what we're not being told. Part 2, continued. In the beginning, Arceus created 3 beings. Dialga to govern time, Palkia to rule space, and Giratina to embody antimatter. That's the complete story, the one that eventually came to light after centuries of suppression. But here's what should disturb you. If Arceus is truly omnipotent, truly all-knowing, truly perfect in every way, why did it create something it would immediately need to banish? Think about the sequence of events. Arceus shapes the universe from nothing. It creates Dialga and Palkia to establish time and space, the fundamental frameworks of reality. And alongside them, it creates Giratina, not as an afterthought, not as an accident. Giratina is born at the same moment as its siblings, 3 eggs emerging from Arceus simultaneously, 3 beings of equal power, each representing a cosmic force necessary for existence. Time, space, antimatter. Except here's the problem. After creating the universe, after establishing the Lake Guardians, after setting everything in motion, Arceus looks at Giratina and decides it made a mistake. This being it created, this fundamental aspect of reality it brought into existence with intention and purpose, is too violent, too aggressive, too dangerous. So Arceus does the only thing it can do. It banishes Giratina to another dimension, the Distortion world, a place where normal physical laws don't apply, where gravity shifts randomly, where time doesn't flow properly, where space folds in on itself in impossible configurations. The Platinum Pokédex entry is chillingly brief. It was banished for its violence. It silently gazed upon the old world from the Distortion world. For its violence, that's all the explanation we get. Giratina, a being Arceus deliberately created, had to be exiled because it was too violent for the world Arceus was trying to build. And from that moment on, Giratina watches, silent, patient, resentful, staring at the universe it should have been part of, separated by a dimensional barrier, alone in a twisted reflection of reality. This is what I call the original sin of the Pokémon universe. Not humanity's sin, God's sin. The sin of creating something you can't control, something that shouldn't exist but does because you made it so, and then punishing that creation for being exactly what you designed it to be. Let's unpack this, because the more you think about it, the more disturbing it becomes. Arceus is supposed to be omniscient. It knows all, sees all, understands all possible outcomes before they occur. So when it created Giratina, it knew exactly what it was creating. It knew Giratina would be violent. It knew Giratina would be destructive. It knew Giratina would be incompatible with the world it was building. And it created Giratina anyway. Why? If you're building a perfect universe from scratch, and you have unlimited power and perfect knowledge, why would you intentionally include a flaw? Why would you create something you'd have to immediately imprison? The common interpretation is that Giratina represents antimatter, and antimatter is inherently destructive when it contacts regular matter. The two annihilate each other, releasing energy. So perhaps Arceus created Giratina, knowing that antimatter needs to exist for the universe to function properly, but also knowing that antimatter couldn't coexist with regular matter in the same space. The Distortion world wasn't a punishment, it was a necessity. a separate dimension where antimatter could exist without destroying everything else. That's the generous interpretation, the one that lets Arceus off the hook, that suggests this was all part of the plan, that the banishment was really just careful universal design. And honestly, there might be truth to that. The distortion world serves a purpose. Cynthia theorizes that it's the reverse side of the Pokémon world, a counterbalance that keeps reality stable. Damage something in the distortion world, and the regular world suffers consequences. They're two sides of the same coin, two halves of a whole, neither able to exist without the other. But that doesn't address the violence. That doesn't explain why Giratina is described as aggressive, territorial, filled with rage. If it's just antimatter given form, if it's just a necessary physical law personified, why does it have these emotions? Why does it hold a grudge? Why does every source describe it as angry, resentful, vengeful? Because Giratina isn't just antimatter, it's a being, a conscious entity with thoughts and feelings and desires, and it was created knowing it would spend eternity separated from its siblings, locked away in a dimension of chaos and distortion, forever watching a world it could never truly be part of. That's not just physics, that's cruelty. Imagine being born and immediately told, "You're too dangerous to exist here. You're necessary, but you're also wrong. So we're putting you in solitary confinement for the rest of time. You can watch your siblings get to participate in reality, get to be worshipped and revered, but you're the secret we don't talk about. You're the third child we pretend doesn't exist." Is it any wonder Giratina is violent? The lore tells us that Giratina was raging when it was banished. The spooky plate in Legends Arceus has an inscription. The other side of this world was given by the original one to its raging third. Its raging third, not its violent third, not its dangerous third, its raging third. The anger came first. The fury was part of Giratina's nature from the moment of creation. Or perhaps it developed immediately upon realizing what it was and what that meant for its existence. And here's where the theology gets really dark. If Arceus is omnipotent and created Giratina knowing all of this, then Arceus chose to create a being that would suffer, chose to bring into existence a consciousness that would spend eternity in pain, in isolation, in rage. That's not the action of a benevolent creator. That's the action of something that views suffering as necessary, as useful, as part of the grand design. Some of you might be thinking, but Giratina isn't suffering. It rules the distortion world. It's powerful. It intervenes in important events. It saved reality from Cyrus. And you're right. Giratina isn't helpless. It's not weak. It's one of the most powerful Pokemon in existence, equal in strength to Dialga and Palkia. But power doesn't equal happiness. Capability doesn't equal fulfillment. You can be incredibly strong and still be fundamentally broken. Look at what Giratina does when it finally gets a chance to interact with the regular world. In Pokemon Platinum, when Cyrus uses the red chain to summon and control Dialga and Palkia, attempting to use their power to destroy the current universe and create a new one without spirit or emotion, Giratina appears. It tears open a portal from the distortion world, drags Cyrus and the player into its domain, and attacks. The common interpretation is that Giratina was defending reality, stopping Cyrus's plan because the destruction of the universe would have destroyed the distortion world too. Giratina was acting as a hero, a guardian, protecting the balance. But look closer at the sequence. Giratina doesn't just stop Cyrus, it's furious. It's attacking everything. It drags Cyrus into the Distortion world, not to imprison him, but to have him there, in its domain, where it can... what? Keep him? Torture him? Make him understand what isolation feels like? And when you defeat Giratina, or catch it, Cyrus doesn't escape. He stays in the Distortion world. By choice, yes, but also because Giratina's intervention shattered his grip on reality. The Distortion world broke him in a way that his failure never could have. He's trapped there now, not physically but psychologically, wandering the impossible geometries, contemplating the void. Did Giratina intend that outcome? Was the rage it displayed really righteous fury at the threat to reality? Or was it something deeper? The anger of a prisoner who sees someone trying to destroy the very prison that's defined its existence. In Pokémon Legends Arceus, we get a different perspective on Giratina's motivations, and it's arguably even more troubling. Volo, the merchant who's secretly been manipulating events throughout the entire game, reveals his true goal. He wants to meet Arceus and force it to create a better world. A world without suffering, without pain, without the imperfections that plague the current reality. And to do this, he's partnered with Giratina. Giratina appears at Volo's side willingly. It fights alongside him against you, the player character. And when you defeat its altered form, it transforms into origin form and continues the battle. This isn't Giratina being controlled or tricked. This is Giratina choosing to help someone who wants to confront Arceus and demand answers. Someone who wants to tear down the world Arceus created and force it to make something better. Why would Giratina do that? Because Giratina agrees. Because Giratina has spent countless eons staring at the universe from behind a dimensional barrier, watching the suffering, the imperfection, the constant struggles of the beings Arceus created, and thinking, this is what we were banished for? This is the precious world we couldn't be part of. It's broken, it's flawed, it needs to be unmade and rebuilt correctly. Giratina isn't evil. Giratina is disillusioned. It's a being that was created to serve a purpose, was punished for existing, and then watched from exile as the perfect world Arceus built turned out to be anything but perfect. Of course it would ally with someone who wants to hold Arceus accountable. Of course it would support a plan to force the creator to justify its creation. But here's the thing that makes Giratina's story even more tragic. It loses. You defeat it. And after being defeated, it retreats back to the Distortion world. Not because it has to, not because someone forces it, it just goes back. To the prison dimension, to the isolation. Because where else would it go? The regular world isn't its home. It never was. Even if it wanted to stay, even if it could stay without causing catastrophic damage to reality, it wouldn't belong. Giratina is defined by its exile. The banishment isn't just where it lives, it's what it is. Arceus created a being whose entire existence is defined by not being allowed to exist properly. That's the original sin. That's the flaw at the heart of creation. The Pokémon universe isn't built on harmony and perfection. It's built on exclusion, on sacrifice, on someone having to carry the burden of being the dark reflection, the antimatter shadow, the forgotten third child. And Arceus knew, had to have known, created it anyway. The Distortion world itself is worth examining because it tells us a lot about what Giratina represents and what its banishment means. It's not just another dimension, it's an inversion, a mirror. Physics works backwards. What should fall rises. What should be solid becomes fluid. Gravity has no consistent direction. The landscape is a nightmare of floating platforms, waterfalls flowing upward, trees growing in impossible configurations. Time doesn't seem to flow correctly. Space folds back on itself. Some researchers theorize that the Distortion world is what the Pokémon world would look like if Giratina had been allowed to help shape it. That theory is horrifying because it suggests that Giratina's natural state, the kind of reality it would create if given the chance, is fundamentally incompatible with life as we understand it. Nothing could survive in the Distortion world long term. Nothing could evolve, grow, thrive. It's chaos given form, entropy as an environment. But here's another interpretation that's equally disturbing. What if the Distortion world is what it is because Giratina made it that way? Not because that's its natural inclination, but because after eons of isolation and rage, this is what its consciousness shaped the dimension into. What if the Distortion world started as a blank canvas, a neutral space where antimatter could exist, and Giratina, in its fury and pain, warped it into this twisted reflection of the world it was excluded from? Think about it. You're locked in an empty room for eternity with nothing but your anger and your power. What do you create? Not paradise, not order. You create a statement. You create a manifesto in environmental form. You make your prison into a monument to how wrong everything is, how broken creation is, how the perfect world you're looking at from the outside is actually garbage compared to the pure, honest chaos of what you're building in here. The Distortion world isn't antimatter physics. It's Giratina's rage made manifest. Every impossible angle, every gravity-defying platform, every space where logic breaks down is a middle finger to Arceus's ordered universe. You want order? You want physical laws that make sense? You want a reality where things are predictable and safe? Fine, I'll build the opposite. I'll make a world that's honest about how meaningless the rules are, about how arbitrary your design really is. And the tragic part? This act of rebellion, this creation of chaos, only reinforces why Giratina needed to be banished in the first place. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Arceus exiles Giratina because it's too dangerous, and that exile makes Giratina into something truly dangerous, and that transformation justifies the original exile. Giratina can never escape the cycle because the cycle is what it's become. Except, there are moments, glimpses, times when Giratina acts not as a force of rage but as a protector. The Platinum event where it stops Cyrus can be read as heroic. The way it allows you to enter and leave the Distortion world freely in various games suggests it's not mindlessly hostile. In the anime, particularly in Giratina and the Sky Warrior, we see it defend its dimension against pollution caused by Dialga and Palkia's fighting. It's aggressive, yes, but it's protecting its home. That's not villainy. That's justified anger at having your space invaded. Maybe Giratina isn't evil. Maybe it's just hurt. Maybe the violence everyone talks about is really just defensive behavior from a being that's been rejected by its creator and wants nothing more than to be left alone in the one place where it belongs. The Distortion world isn't a prison, it's a sanctuary. The only place where Giratina can exist without causing problems, without being a threat, without having to face the constant reminder of what it can't be. And maybe, just maybe, that's exactly what Arceus intended. Not cruelty, but pragmatism. Create antimatter as a being because everything must be given consciousness in this universe, even fundamental forces. Give that being its own dimension because that's the only way it can exist safely. Yes, it will be isolated. Yes, it will suffer, but the alternative is not creating it at all. And a universe without antimatter is a universe that can't exist. Sometimes creation requires sacrifice. Sometimes perfection requires pain. That's not comforting. That doesn't make it okay. But it might be the truth. The cold utilitarian truth that Arceus, being omniscient, understood from the beginning. Some things have to suffer for everything else to work. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the one. And Giratina is the one that has to bear that burden for all of reality to function. It's trolley problem philosophy elevated to cosmic scale. Do you create a being that will suffer eternally, but is necessary for universal stability? Or do you not create it and have no universe at all? Arceus chose to create, and Giratina has spent eternity paying the price for that choice. The relationship between Arceus and Giratina is the darkest aspect of Pokemon lore because it exposes something we don't like to think about. The creator isn't purely benevolent. It's pragmatic. It makes hard choices. It creates suffering when necessary. And it doesn't lose sleep over it because maybe when you exist outside time and see all possible outcomes simultaneously, you stop thinking about individual pain and start thinking only about systemic function. Giratina is necessary. Giratina is suffering. Both things are true. And Arceus allows both things to continue being true, because changing either would break everything. That's not a loving God. That's a watchmaker God. An engineer God. A God that built a machine and doesn't care if some of the gears have to grind painfully for the whole mechanism to work. And that brings us to perhaps the most unsettling aspect of Arceus's nature. After creating the universe, after setting everything in motion, after making all these hard choices about what suffering is necessary and what beings need to be isolated, Arceus stops intervening. It falls silent. The universe is created. Time flows. Space expands. Life evolves. Civilizations rise and fall. Disasters occur. Wars break out. Legendary Pokémon rampage across regions. Cities are destroyed. Apocalypses threaten to unmake everything Arceus built. And through it all, Arceus watches from beyond time and space and does nothing. This is the second great mystery of Arceus lore. Not what it is or how it creates, but why it doesn't act. Why does the creator allow suffering when it has the power to prevent it? Why does it permit threats to its own creation when it could eliminate them with a thought? Why does it remain silent when everything it built is constantly on the verge of collapse? Let's look at the evidence. Throughout Pokemon's history, we've seen multiple extinction-level threats. In Hoenn, teams Aqua and Magma awaken Kyogre and Groudon, primordial titans whose conflict threatens to drown the world or burn it to ash. Sinnoh, Team Galactic attempts to use Dialga and Palkia to erase the current universe and create a new one. In Kalos, Team Flare activates the ultimate weapon, a device that could genocide millions. In Galar, the darkest day nearly consumes the region in chaos. These aren't minor threats. These are world-ending scenarios. Arceus doesn't intervene in any of them, not directly, not with its own power. It lets children handle it. Literal children, 10 to 15 years old, are the ones who have to stop these apocalypses. Not the creator deity, not the being that shaped all there is in this world. Kids, why? The standard answer is free will. Arceus gave Pokemon and humans agency, the ability to make their own choices, to shape their own destinies. If it intervened every time something bad happened, there would be no point to consciousness, no meaning to existence. Everything would just be Arceus playing with dolls, moving pieces around a board. For reality to matter, for choices to have weight, Arceus has to step back and let events play out. That's philosophically sound. It's the classic theodicy argument. God allows evil because preventing it would require removing free will, and free will is more valuable than the suffering it occasionally causes. Many religions grapple with this exact question. Why does a good God allow bad things to happen? And the answer is usually some variation of, because the alternative is worse. But here's the problem with applying that logic to Arceus. It's not consistent. Arceus does intervene sometimes. In the Jewel of Life movie, Arceus personally stops a meteor from destroying the world. In Legends Arceus, it directly involves itself in testing and choosing the player character. It gifts its power to certain Pokémon, creating noble Pokémon. It manifests at the Hall of Origin when called by the Azure Flute. So it's not that Arceus can't intervene or has some absolute rule against doing so. It chooses when to act and when to watch, and the criteria for those choices are unclear at best, arbitrary at worst. Why does it stop a meteor but not stop Team Galactic? Why does it test one human in ancient Hisui but ignore the countless crises in modern times? Why does it create a system where children are expected to resolve cosmic threats? These aren't rhetorical questions. They're fundamental to understanding what Arceus is and what it wants. One possibility, Arceus intervenes only when the threat is external or cosmic in scale. The meteor would have destroyed the planet, a rock from space that has nothing to do with choices made by beings Arceus created. That's like cleaning up a mess that's not anyone's fault, just bad luck. But Team Galactic? That's humans making choices. That's free will in action, even if the choices are terrible. Arceus won't stop that because stopping it would mean invalidating human agency. Another possibility, Arceus is testing. Every crisis is an exam. Every apocalypse is a challenge designed to see if its creation is worthy of continuing to exist. This is darker because it implies that Arceus is perfectly willing to let the world burn if nobody rises to save it. The fact that someone always does, that there's always a young trainer who catches the right legendary Pokémon and stops the evil team, might not be luck or coincidence. It might be Arceus deliberately ensuring those trainers exist, giving them just enough power and opportunity to succeed if they're clever and brave enough, but never guaranteeing success. The universe is a test. If you pass, you get to keep existing. If you fail, well, Arceus will just create something better from the ashes. It's done it before, probably, in timelines we can't see, in possibilities that didn't work out. Dialga controls time. Palkia controls space. That means alternate timelines, parallel universes, infinite variations of reality. Arceus has access to all of them. Maybe we're not special. Maybe we're just one iteration that happens to have succeeded so far. And there are countless other versions where humanity failed, and Arceus moved on to the next attempt. That's a horrifying thought. It means nothing we do ultimately matters to Arceus, because even if we fail, even if our entire reality collapses, it's just data. It's just information about what doesn't work, fed back into the system so the next version can be better. We're not the beloved creation of a caring deity. We're beta testers for reality. But maybe I'm being too cynical. Maybe there's a kinder interpretation. Maybe Arceus doesn't intervene because it trusts. It created consciousness, emotion, willpower. It gave beings the tools they need to solve problems. When crisis arises, Arceus doesn't act because it knows its creation can handle it. The legendary Pokémon exist for a reason. The late Guardians can calm Dialga and Palkia. Rayquaza can stop Kyogre and Groudon. Humans can strategize, can befriend Pokémon, can work together to overcome threats. Arceus stepping in would be an insult to its own creation, an admission that it didn't build things well enough. That's the optimistic view. Arceus is like a parent watching their child ride a bike for the first time, ready to catch them if they fall, but desperately hoping they don't need to. It wants its creation to succeed on its own merits. It wants the universe to prove it can sustain itself without constant divine intervention. Except the bike metaphor falls apart when the stakes are extinction. A parent watching their child ride a bike will intervene if the child is about to get hit by a car. They won't let principle override survival. But Arceus apparently will. Arceus apparently is fine with letting the universe gamble with annihilation, because that's the only way to prove the system works. Unless, of course, Arceus knows the outcome in advance. If it's omniscient, if it exists outside time and can see all possible futures, then maybe it's not gambling at all. Maybe it only allows crises that it knows will be resolved. Every time Team Galactic threatens the universe, Arceus already knows a young trainer named Dawn or Lucas will stop them. Every time Kyogre and Groudon fight, Arceus already knows Rayquaza will intervene. The illusion of danger, the appearance of risk, but actually perfect safety because the outcome is predetermined. That's philosophically interesting, but existentially crushing. It means we don't have free will. It means every choice we think we're making was already seen, already accounted for, already incorporated into the grand design. We're not agents. We're actors reading from a script Arceus wrote before time began. The universe isn't a test. It's a play. And Arceus is the only one in the audience. I don't know which interpretation is correct. Maybe none of them are. Maybe Arceus's motivations are so far beyond human or Pokémon comprehension that trying to understand them is like an ant trying to understand calculus. We can observe the results. We can see that Arceus usually doesn't intervene. We can theorize about why, but we can't know. And maybe that's the point. Maybe the silence is intentional. Maybe Arceus wants us to wonder, to struggle with the absence of clear answers, to develop philosophies and moralities and meanings in the space where divine guidance should be, but isn't. If Arceus constantly appeared and told everyone exactly what to do, we'd be puppets. The silence, cruel as it sometimes feels, is the price of autonomy. But here's what really keeps me up at night about the Silent God. What if Arceus isn't silent by choice? What if it's silent because it can't speak? What if creating the universe took so much out of it that it's essentially spent, dormant, operating on autopilot? The avatars we encounter, the fragments that manifest at the Hall of Origin or the Sinjoh Ruins, might be running on pre-programmed responses. The true Arceus, the vast entity beyond time and space, might be asleep, dormant, recovering from the act of creation, which was so monumental that even an omnipotent being needed to rest afterward. The Canalave Library has books about the creation myth, and one of them explicitly says that after Dialga and Palkia created the universe, Arceus fell into a deep sleep. Most people interpret that as metaphor. But what if it's literal? What if Arceus used so much power to shape reality that it had to go dormant, and it's been sleeping ever since? And everything that's happened in the Pokemon world for thousands of years has been the universe running on systems Arceus set up before it went to sleep? That would explain the silence. That would explain why intervention is so rare and seems almost mechanical when it does happen. The Azure Flute works because it was designed to trigger an automatic response, not because it's waking Arceus up. The fragments that join trainers are preloaded subroutines, not conscious decisions. The universe is an engine Arceus built and then walked away from, trusting it to run itself. And maybe it's still asleep. Maybe it will always be asleep. Maybe the act of creating reality is so exhaustive that Arceus will never wake up, and we're essentially orphans, creations of a god that birthed us and then immediately passed out from the effort, leaving us to fend for ourselves in a universe with no active guardian. That's bleak. That's cosmically lonely. But it fits the evidence. It explains why legendary Pokémon, these beings of immense power that Arceus created to serve specific functions, often go rogue or fight each other or cause problems. They're not being supervised. Dad's asleep upstairs and the kids are running wild, breaking things, setting fires with no one to stop them except other kids who notice the problem. Or maybe Arceus is awake but doesn't care anymore. Maybe it created the universe out of curiosity or boredom, watched it for a while, got bored again, and moved on to other projects. Maybe there are infinite universes, infinite Pokémon worlds, and ours is just one of countless experiments Arceus is running simultaneously. It checks in occasionally, manifests an avatar when something interests it, but mostly it's focused elsewhere, on realities more engaging than ours. We're not the beloved creation. We're the ant farm Arceus set up and then forgot about, occasionally remembering we exist and dropping in to see how we're doing, but mostly leaving us to our own devices. That's not malevolent. That's worse than malevolent. That's indifferent. The silent god is the most terrifying version of Arceus, because silence can mean anything. It can mean trust or abandonment. It can mean testing or neglect. It can mean omniscient observation or complete absence. We don't know. We can't know. And Arceus isn't telling. But you know what's even more terrifying than a silent god? Humans who get tired of the silence and decide to create their own. Humans who look at the absence of divine guidance and think, if God won't help us, if God won't intervene, if God won't even explain itself, then why do we need God at all? Why don't we just become gods ourselves? That ambition, that hubris, that beautiful, terrible human tendency to solve every problem by building something new. That's where our story goes next. Because while Arceus slept or watched or ignored the world it created, humanity was busy studying it, learning from it, and eventually, inevitably, deciding to recreate it. They called it the Beast Killer Project, but really it was humanity's first serious attempt to kill God, not literally, but symbolically, philosophically, to prove that the divine could be replicated, understood, controlled, to create an artificial Arceus, and prove that omnipotence isn't unique, isn't special, isn't beyond the reach of science and determination. This is the story of type, Null. This is humanity's original sin. And unlike Arceus' sin of creating Giratina, this one doesn't have any pragmatic justification. This one is pure hubris, pure arrogance, and it's one of the most fascinating and disturbing stories in Pokémon lore. Let's set the stage. The Alola region, present day. The Aether Foundation, an organization ostensibly dedicated to Pokémon conservation and protection, is running a secret project. They're studying the myths and legends of Sinjoh, the ancient texts from the Canalave library, anything they can find about Arceus. And they have a goal, Create an artificial Pokémon that can rival the power of the original one. Why? The official story is defense against the Ultra Beasts, extra-dimensional creatures that pose a threat to the Alola region. They need something powerful enough to fight these alien beings. Something adaptable, something that can change types and strategies on the fly. An artificial legendary Pokemon that can serve as the ultimate guardian. But that's not the whole truth. You don't model your ultimate weapon after God unless you're thinking bigger than just defense. You don't name your ability Arceus System, a deliberate play on Arceus, unless you're making a statement. You don't create a synthetic deity as a research project unless somewhere, deep down, you're trying to prove that you can, that the divine is just another engineering problem, that omnipotence is just a matter of the right DNA combinations and enough funding. The Ether Foundation researched everything about Arceus they could find, its ability to change types by holding different plates, its balanced stats across all categories, its signature move, Judgment, that changes type dynamically, its role as creator and protector. And they thought, we can replicate this, we can build our own. So they started splicing DNA, taking genetic material from multiple Pokemon species, trying to create a synthetic organism that embodied traits from every type. They wanted something that could adapt to any situation, counter any threat, shift its nature as needed. They wanted to create versatility incarnate. They wanted to play God, and they succeeded. Sort of. They created 3 units, type, full. Prototype Pokemon designed to possess the power of all types, to be able to shift between any elemental affinity, to serve as the ultimate adaptable weapon. But there was a problem. The creatures they created couldn't handle their own power. The Arceus system, the artificial version of Arceus's multi-type ability, overwhelmed them. They rejected it. Their bodies and minds couldn't cope with the strain of containing all possible types simultaneously. They went berserk. They became uncontrollable, violent, dangerous. The beast killers couldn't be controlled, which meant they were more threatening than the beasts they were meant to kill. The Ether Foundation had to make a choice. They could destroy their creations, admit failure, shut down the project, or they could adapt. They chose adaptation. They fitted each unit with a control mask, a helmet, designed to suppress the Arceus system, to limit the Pokemon's power and keep it manageable. They locked away these artificial gods in mechanical prisons, restraints built into their own heads, and they renamed the project. Type. Full became Type. Null. A name that says everything about what they'd created. Something that should be complete but isn't. Something that's fundamentally broken, fundamentally incomplete, fundamentally zero. Null. Nothing. A failure. They put the 3 type, Null units into cryogenic storage. The project was officially terminated, declared a disaster, hidden away in the archives. But one of those units escaped. Gladion, the son of the Ether Foundation's president, freed it, took it with him when he ran away from home, and together they discovered something the researchers hadn't. The helmet wasn't just a limiter, it was a barrier. It prevented Type. Null from reaching its potential, yes, but it also prevented it from bonding with the trainer, from developing trust, from becoming what it was truly meant to be. When Type, Null trusts its trainer completely. When the bond becomes strong enough, it destroys its own mask. Voluntarily. Shatters the restraint and evolves into Silvally. And in that moment, it becomes what the Ether Foundation always wanted. A Pokemon that can rival legends. the RKS system activates. It can hold memory disks and shift between any type. It learns multi-attack, a move that functions exactly like Judgment. Its stats are perfectly balanced at 95 across the board, an echo of Arceus's 120s. Silvally is humanity's artificial god, and it's both a triumph and a tragedy. The triumph is obvious. They did it. Humans successfully created a Pokémon with godlike abilities through science and engineering. No divine intervention, no mystical power, just research, genetic manipulation, technology. They proved that the legendary Pokémon aren't unique gifts from creation. They're patterns that can be studied, understood, replicated. Arceus might have made the original, but humanity can make copies. The divine has been demystified, reduced to data, reproduced in a laboratory. That should be terrifying to anyone who understands the implications. If Silvally works, if it's a genuine replication of Arceus's core ability, then what's stopping humanity from going further? What's stopping them from creating their own Dialga, their own Palkia, their own Giratina? What's stopping them from building an entire pantheon of artificial legends and using them to reshape reality according to human desires rather than divine design? Nothing. Nothing's stopping them except ethics, funding, and fear of consequences. The technology exists. The knowledge exists. The Ether Foundation proved it's possible. They opened Pandora's box, and even though they tried to close it again by terminating the project, the box stays open. Other organizations will try. Other researchers will follow the path they blazed. The Beast Killer Project might have failed officially, but philosophically, it succeeded beyond anyone's wildest nightmares. But here's the tragedy. Silvally isn't happy. It's powerful, yes. It's functional. But look at its lore, its Pokédex entries, its design. This is a creature that was built rather than born, engineered rather than evolved, created to serve a purpose rather than to exist for its own sake. It's a chimera, a fusion of multiple Pokémon's DNA, a synthetic monster wearing its own suppression mask, until someone teaches it to trust. Silvally's entire existence is defined by its artificiality. It doesn't have a natural habitat. It doesn't have a species in the traditional sense. There's no wild population of Silvally. There's just the 3 that were created, and possibly more if the project continues elsewhere. It's alone in a way even Mewtwo wasn't, because at least Mewtwo is a clone of Mew. At least it has a genetic parent. Silvally is built from parts, an artificial construct that resembles Pokémon but isn't quite one, and it knows. On some level, it has to know it's different, that it wasn't meant to exist, that it's a mistake that became a weapon, a failure that became a tool. When it shatters its mask and becomes Silvally, is that evolution or breaking free? Is it becoming its true self, or just accessing a higher tier of its programming? Does Silvally have genuine emotions, genuine desires, or are those just sophisticated responses coded into its DNA by researchers who needed their weapon to be able to bond with handlers? I don't have answers to those questions. The game doesn't provide them. But the uncertainty itself is part of the horror. Humanity created something that might be alive, might be conscious, might be suffering, and we don't even know for sure. We created ambiguous existence, life that might not qualify as life, and we did it deliberately in pursuit of power. That's the real sin. Not that humanity tried to rival Arceus's power, not that the project failed and created unstable monsters. The sin is that we created beings whose very existence is torture, whose nature is contradictory, whose purpose is to fight and kill. and we did it knowing full well what we were doing. The Ether Foundation knew type. Null was suffering under the mask. They documented it. They observed the pain and the instability and the desperate attempts to break free. And they kept it under control anyway because the project was too important, the potential too valuable. When Gladian freed his type, Null, when he chose compassion over scientific progress, he was committing heresy against the cult of human advancement. The Ether Foundation saw those creatures as resources, as tools, as means to an end. Gladion saw his partner as a person, a being deserving of freedom and dignity regardless of how it was created. That's the fundamental moral question at the heart of the type. Null story. If you create artificial life, do you owe it anything? Or is it just property, intellectual output, something you own because you built it? Pokemon has always danced around questions of Pokemon rights and autonomy. The entire franchise is built on capturing wild creatures and using them in battles. But type. Null makes it explicit, unavoidable. This Pokemon exists only because humans wanted a weapon. It has no natural purpose, no ecological niche, no reason to exist except human desire for power. And yet it's conscious. It feels pain, forms bonds, has preferences and fears and hopes. At what point does manufactured life become real life? At what point does the artificial deserve the same moral consideration as the natural? These aren't abstract philosophical questions. They're practical, urgent, immediate, because the type, Null project happened. It's canon. It's part of the Pokemon world's history. And if it happened once, it'll happen again. Somewhere, someone is looking at Silvally and thinking, we can improve on that. We can make it better. We can make it stronger. The RKS system. Arceus. Get it? It's not even subtle. The researchers were making a direct statement. We can build Arceus. We can replicate God. And with enough iteration, enough refinement, enough resources, we can surpass God. That's humanity's greatest strength and greatest curse. We never stop pushing. We never accept limits. We're told something is impossible, divine, beyond our reach, and we immediately start figuring out how to reach it anyway. Arceus created the universe? Cool, we'll create Pokemon. Arceus can change types? Cool, we'll build a system that does the same thing. Arceus is omnipotent? Cool, give us a few more years of R&D and some willing test subjects, and we'll get there. The type, Null story is a warning. It's the Pokemon universe telling us, you wanted to see what happens when humans try to play God. Here. Look at these suffering creatures locked in mechanical masks, their power too great for their bodies, their existence defined by pain and restraint. Look at what hubris creates. Look at the cost of ambition. But it's also a promise. Because despite everything, despite the failure and the suffering and the ethical nightmare, Silvally works. It's powerful. It's adaptable. It's effective. The project achieved its goal, even if the cost was too high. And that means future projects will account for the mistakes. We'll iterate on the design. We'll create version 2.0 and 3.0. And eventually something that doesn't need a suppression mask, doesn't suffer, doesn't fail. Humanity will create artificial gods that actually function correctly. It's not a matter of if, it's when. And when that happens, when humans have successfully replicated the divine, when we can create legendary Pokemon in laboratories, produce them on assembly lines, control them completely, what happens to Arceus? What happens to the original when copies flood the market? What happens to the creator when its creation no longer needs it, can replace, it can potentially surpass it? Maybe that's why Arceus is silent. Maybe it's watching humanity stumble toward godhood, watching us make the same mistakes it made, creating life that suffers, building power we can't quite control, reaching for omnipotence without understanding what omnipotence costs. Maybe it's waiting to see if we'll figure out what it learned, that being God isn't about power, it's about responsibility. And some responsibilities are too heavy to bear, even for beings that shape the universe. Or maybe Arceus doesn't care. Maybe it's amused. Maybe from its perspective outside time and space, watching humanity's desperate scramble to achieve artificially what it did naturally is like watching children play dress-up, pretending to be adults, thinking they understand the world when they've barely scratched the surface. Silvally is impressive to us. To Arceus, it's probably a crude toy, a wooden sword compared to Excalibur, a child's drawing of the sun compared to the actual star. But even if Silvally isn't a genuine threat to Arceus's position as the supreme being, it represents something more dangerous than power. It represents knowledge. Humanity now knows that legendary Pokémon aren't special. They're just complex. And anything complex can be studied, understood, and eventually replicated. The mystique is gone. The divine is reduced to biology and programming. And once you stop seeing gods as gods and start seeing them as really advanced Pokémon, the reverence dies, the worship ends, and what's left is just engineering problems. The Beast Killer project killed more than beasts. It killed the sanctity of the legendary Pokémon. It killed the assumption that some things are beyond human reach. It killed the idea that we need to respect limits or accept boundaries. And it did all of this by creating 3 suffering, broken creatures locked in masks, desperately trying to be something they were never meant to be. Type, Null is humanity's reflection in a funhouse mirror. We're all wearing masks, suppressing our true nature, built from parts that don't quite fit together, trying to live up to standards we were never designed to meet. We're all chimeras of expectations and DNA, fighting against our own limitations, breaking ourselves in pursuit of becoming something greater. The only difference is that type. Null's mask is literal, and its creation was intentional. When Silvally breaks free, when it evolves and becomes what it was meant to be, is that triumph? Or is it just acceptance? Accepting that you're a weapon, that you were built to fight, that your purpose is violence, and choosing to embrace that rather than resist it. Is Silvally's evolution freedom or resignation? I think about that a lot. I think about what it means that the only way for type, Null, to reach its potential is to trust a human, not to break free on its own, not to reject humanity entirely, but to find one person it trusts enough to let its guard down. The creature humanity created to rival Arceus can only become powerful through the same bonds that make regular Pokémon strong: trust, friendship, connection. Maybe that's the lesson. Maybe that's what the Ether Foundation got wrong. They tried to engineer divinity through force, through genetic manipulation, through control and suppression. But actual power, actual godhood, comes from connection. Arceus isn't powerful because it's omnipotent. It's powerful because it created beings capable of consciousness, emotion, choice. The universe isn't Arceus's weapon. It's Arceus's family. And Silvally only works when it stops being a weapon and starts being a partner. That's beautiful if you're optimistic. If you're cynical, it's just another form of control. Convince the weapon that it's loved, that it matters, that's more than just a tool, and it'll fight even harder for you. Is Gladion's type, Null, truly free, or has it just found a more comfortable prison in the form of a trainer who treats it well? I don't know. I genuinely don't know. And that ambiguity is what makes the type. Null's story so powerful, so disturbing, so human. We created something and immediately complicated it with emotion and ethics and relationships, and now nobody can agree on what it actually is or what its existence means. Just like Giratina, just like the Unown, just like Arceus itself, type. Null and Silvally are mirrors reflecting our confusion about existence, purpose, and meaning. We don't understand why we're here. We don't know if we were created with a purpose, or if we're accidents finding purpose after the fact. We don't know if consciousness is a gift or a curse, if existence is meaningful or arbitrary, if there's a grand design or just chaos that looks like design from the right angle. And so we project all of that onto Pokémon, onto these digital creatures in a game for children, and we find reflected back at us the same questions that have haunted humanity since we first looked up at the stars and wondered if anyone was looking back. Arceus is those questions given form, the Avatar theory, the Unown as the Thousand Arms, the Azure Flute's forbidden call, Giratina's eternal banishment, the silent god's absence, humanity's desperate attempt to replicate divinity. All of it is us asking, is there meaning? Is there purpose? Is anyone watching? Does anyone care? And if they don't, can we create our own meaning, our own purpose, our own gods? The Pokémon universe doesn't answer these questions. It can't, because they're not questions with answers. They're questions that define what it means to be conscious, to be aware, to be trapped in existence, trying to understand existence from the inside. But maybe that's okay. Maybe the questions are the point. Maybe Arceus, if it's watching, doesn't want us to find answers. It wants us to keep searching, keep wondering, keep creating and destroying and suffering and loving and building artificial gods from our desperate need to understand why we exist at all. Or maybe Arceus isn't watching. Maybe it's gone, moved on, asleep, dead, never existed in the first place. Maybe the universe runs itself now, has always run itself, will always run itself, and all our myths and legends and theories about creators and creation are just stories we tell to feel less alone in the vast, indifferent cosmos. Maybe the original one is us. Maybe consciousness is the egg that hatched from chaos, and every aware being is a fragment of that first moment of awareness, scattered across reality, trying to find each other, trying to remember what it was like before we were separated into individuals, before we were cursed with the knowledge that we exist and the certainty that one day we won't. Maybe Arceus isn't God. Maybe Arceus is the universe looking at itself and asking, why am I? And maybe we're the answer to that question, or at least the beginning of an answer. We're the universe experiencing itself, understanding itself, creating within itself, fractals of consciousness reflecting infinite variations of the same fundamental mystery. Or maybe I'm overthinking a kid's game about catching cute monsters and making them fight each other. Maybe there's no deeper meaning. Maybe Arceus is just a really strong Pokémon with good lore, and all this philosophical tangent is me projecting way too hard onto content that was never meant to bear this weight. But I don't think so. I think Pokémon, accidentally or intentionally, has created one of the most fascinating mythologies in modern fiction. I think the Arceus lore, with all its contradictions and silences and unsettling implications, is asking real questions about creation, consciousness, and what it means to exist. And I think those questions matter, even if they come wrapped in games about electric mice and fire lizards. Because at the end of the day, whether Arceus is real in the Pokémon universe doesn't matter nearly as much as what Arceus represents to us. It represents our need for origins, for explanations, for someone or something to have planned all this. It represents our fear that maybe nobody planned anything, that existence is random, that we're alone. It represents our hope that even if we can't see the Creator, even if it's silent, even if it seems absent, maybe it's there anyway, watching, caring, holding the universe together with its 1,000 unseen arms. Arceus is faith made manifest, not religious faith necessarily, though there's plenty of that in its design, but fundamental existential faith, the faith that existence means something, that consciousness has purpose, that the universe, for all its chaos and suffering and randomness, is nonetheless a creation, something made with intention, maintained with care, worth preserving and fighting for even when it seems broken beyond repair. And maybe that's the real answer to why Arceus stays silent. Maybe words would cheapen it, maybe direct. Intervention would remove the faith. Maybe the point of creation is to create something capable of existing independently, something that doesn't need its creator's constant validation, something that can look at the silence and the absence and the mystery and choose to find meaning anyway. You don't need to hear from God to know that you exist. You don't need external validation to know that your experiences are real, your emotions matter, your choices have consequences. The fact that you're aware, that you're conscious, that you're here reading these words or listening to this video, that's the miracle. That's the proof of creation, if proof is needed. Arceus shaped the universe with its 1,000 arms. Maybe one of those arms is you. Maybe you're part of the original one, a fragment of divine consciousness experiencing reality from a limited perspective, forgetting your true nature so that you can be surprised by existence, so that discovery can feel meaningful. Or maybe you're just you, born from random chance in a meaningless universe, creating your own meaning through sheer stubborn insistence that life matters even if it shouldn't. Either way, you're here. You exist. You're part of the vast, strange, beautiful, terrible cosmic dance that is reality. And somewhere, maybe Arceus watches, or sleeps, or doesn't exist, and the universe continues, moment by moment, choice by choice, Pokemon by Pokemon, slowly revealing its nature, or slowly creating that nature through the collective actions of all conscious beings within it. The mystery remains, the silence continues, the questions have no answers, or have too many answers, or have answers we're not ready to understand, but the universe doesn't stop existing just because we don't understand it. Reality doesn't pause while we figure out the meaning of life. The world keeps turning, time keeps flowing, space keeps expanding, and somewhere in the distortion world, Giratina keeps watching, silent and resentful, the eternal reminder that even in a universe shaped by a creator, some beings are defined by exile, by suffering, by the cost of existence itself. Arceus created all things, but it didn't create a paradise. It created a reality where suffering and joy coexist, where power and vulnerability intertwine, where the divine and the mortal blur together until you can't tell which is which. It created a universe that's beautiful and broken, meaningful and arbitrary, carefully designed and chaotically random, all at the same time. And maybe that's exactly what it intended. Maybe perfection isn't the goal. Maybe the goal is just existence. Complex, messy, painful, wonderful existence. The kind of reality where children can catch gods, where science can rival creation, where even the exiled and forgotten can matter, where silence can mean anything or nothing, where you're free to find your own meaning or create it from scratch. Maybe the universe isn't a test, maybe it's a gift. The gift of consciousness, of choice, of the opportunity to exist at all against impossible odds. Maybe every moment you experience, good or bad, meaningful or random, is part of the grand creation Arceus started and left for us to finish. Or maybe I'm giving it too much credit. Maybe the universe is just physics and chemistry, pattern and chaos, with no more inherent meaning than the waves on an ocean. Maybe Arceus doesn't exist, has never existed, was always just a story people told to explain the unexplainable. Maybe we're alone, and these questions have no answers because there's nothing and no one to provide them. But even if that's true, even if the universe is meaningless, and consciousness is an accident, and every Pokémon legend is just a myth with no basis in reality, we're still here. We still exist. We still experience, feel, think, choose. And somewhere in that existence, in the simple fact of being aware, there's something worth protecting, something worth fighting for, something that justifies all the effort and pain and struggle of consciousness. Maybe that's what Arceus truly created, not the universe, not the physical laws or the dimensions or the legendary Pokémon, but the possibility of meaning, the chance that existence could matter even if it doesn't have to, the opportunity for consciousness to look at itself and decide, yes, this is worthwhile, this is beautiful, this is worth preserving. And as the universe continues to turn, as time flows and space expands and antimatter maintains its lonely vigil in the distortion world, as humans continue their desperate climb toward godhood, and Pokémon continue to battle and bond and exist in all their strange, wonderful variety. Maybe somewhere beyond time and space, Arceus watches, and maybe, just maybe, it's satisfied with what it created. Or maybe it's not. Maybe it looks at this flawed, suffering, beautiful, terrible reality and thinks, I could do better. Next time, I'll do better. And maybe there will be a next time. Maybe creation is an eternal process, universe after universe, iteration after iteration, Arceus trying again and again to build something perfect, never quite succeeding, always finding new problems, new suffering, new Giratinas that need to be exiled. Maybe we're just one attempt among infinite attempts, and other versions of reality exist where things went differently, where different choices were made, where consciousness took a different path. Or maybe this is it. Maybe this is the only universe, the only attempt, the only chance. Maybe all the suffering and joy and meaning and meaninglessness of existence is happening once and only once. And when it ends, that's it. No do-overs, no second chances. Just one beautiful, terrible reality, playing out according to rules nobody fully understands, heading toward an end nobody can predict. The truth is, we don't know. We can't know. We're inside the creation, trying to understand the creator, trying to see the big picture when we're trapped in the frame. All we have are myths, theories, observations, questions. All we can do is look at the evidence, think about the implications, and make our best guess about what it all means. Arceus, if you're listening, if you're watching, if you exist at all, thank you. Thank you for the universe, flawed as it is. Thank you for consciousness, painful as it can be. Thank you for the opportunity to exist, to wonder, to ask questions that have no answers. Thank you for the mystery, for the silence, for leaving us free to find our own meaning, or create it from nothing. And if you're not listening, if there's no one there, if the universe is just random chance and evolved complexity, well, thank you anyway. Thank you to existence itself for being interesting enough to inspire these questions. Thank you to consciousness for being weird enough to wonder about itself. Thank you to the void for somehow producing awareness that can contemplate the void. The original one shaped all there is in this world, whether that's Arceus or random chance or something we can't even conceive of. The fact remains that we're here. We exist. We matter, at least to ourselves. And maybe that's enough. Maybe the universe doesn't need external meaning. Maybe the meaning is internal, created by every conscious being choosing to find value in existence despite all evidence that existence is random and meaningless. Maybe we're not waiting for Arceus to tell us what it all means. Maybe we're telling Arceus through our actions and choices and refusal to give up despite everything what it should mean. Maybe we're not the creation. Maybe we're co-creators. Every choice we make, every bond we form, every meaning we find or invent. Maybe that's us shaping the universe with our 1,000 arms. Maybe consciousness is how the universe creates itself, learns about itself, gives itself purpose and meaning and value. Or maybe I've been talking for way too long about a Pokémon, and it's time to let you go to bed. The mysteries remain. Arceus watches from beyond time and space, or doesn't. The Unown write reality into existence, or they're just weird alphabet Pokémon. Giratina suffers in eternal exile, or it's perfectly content in its antimatter dimension. Humanity reaches for godhood, or we're just making cool Pokémon through science. The universe has meaning, or it doesn't. You get to decide what you believe. You get to interpret the lore, draw your own conclusions, find your own meaning in the mystery. That's the beauty of it. That's the gift, whether it comes from a divine creator or from random chance. The freedom to wonder, to question, to decide for yourself what it all means. And perhaps that's the real lesson of Arceus. Not that God exists and watches over us, not that the universe has a creator with a plan, but that consciousness itself is the miracle, that awareness is the gift, that the opportunity to wonder about these questions is more valuable than any answer could ever be. The universe exists. You exist within it. And somewhere in that existence, in the space between what we know and what we can never know, meaning emerges, purpose forms, value crystallizes, not because someone put it there, but because we found it, created it, insisted it exists, even when everything suggests it doesn't. Maybe that's what it means to be shaped by the original one. Not that we were created by an all-powerful deity, but that we're capable of finding the divine in existence itself, of seeing the miraculous in the mundane, of choosing to believe that our lives matter even in a vast, ancient, indifferent universe. And as the last echoes of the Azure Flute's melody fade into silence, as the Unown disperse and return to their ruins, as Giratina retreats once more to the Distortion world, as humanity continues its eternal quest to understand and replicate the divine, as Arceus remains silent, watching or sleeping or gone, the universe continues, moment by moment, choice by choice, mystery by mystery. And now, you can sleep. Perhaps in your dreams, you'll climb a staircase that shouldn't exist. You'll stand in a hall of origin that defies space and time. And there, in the form of golden light, you'll encounter the being that shaped all there is in this world. And maybe finally you'll understand. Or maybe you'll just have more questions. Either way, thank you for joining me on this journey into the heart of Pokemon's greatest mystery. Thank you for wondering with me, questioning with me, diving deep into lore that most people overlook. Until next time, stay curious, stay skeptical, and remember, in a universe shaped by the original one, you're part of that creation too. You matter, your consciousness, your awareness, your existence. It's all part of the grand design, or the grand accident. Both are equally miraculous. Good night.